Welcome back to Arise News Hour. I'm Charles Aniagulu. Now, as we've been hearing, Republicans have continued to make the case for 4 more years of Donald Trump as president as the Republican National Convention continues. Speaking from the freshly renovated Rose Garden at the White House, renovated, of course, by herself, the First Lady Melania Trump promised that she and her husband would continue to fight the good fight for American families in the second term. Well, for his assessment of the First Lady's speech and the rest of the convention, I'm joined now from Atlanta by Erol Morkoc, who, among other things, is a political strategist and media spokesman for the Republicans. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. We spoke to you earlier in the day, and we appreciate your coming back to talk with us. I mean, let's stay away from, the First Lady. We've talked quite a lot about her this evening. What I want to focus on is those recent polls that have suggested that Mr. Trump is lagging well behind his Democratic rival. So presumably success this week will be closing that gap. But of course, closing that gap is easier said than done, because in most areas the president is struggling at the polls, isn't he?
Well, I certainly concur with the maybe on the surface assessment of how we look at polls. But I mean, Donald Trump, if you look at the polls again, you go back to 2016, not to drag that up, but I mean, those polls said the same thing. People are afraid to answer the truth on polls. When you call people and ask them, do you support Donald Trump? People don't feel safe answering that. Now, if we want to look at this on a more analytical way, you have to think about the fact that the convention is supposed to give you a bump. They call it the convention bump, sort of. And Biden didn't really get that. We've been narrowing the gap everywhere. I will concede that if we had this election, let's say 2.5 months ago in the middle of the riots, just people in the fear and chaos caused by Democrat agitators and PC malcontents, we certainly could have seen an election where those polls would have been much more actual, let's say, utility-wise functional. But the situation is that those polls don't really represent the actual silent majority that is not going to be silenced come election day. It's one thing to have, polls where you call people up and ask them, semi-organized questions. What are the demographics? You look at some other polls, you see them tied neck and neck, and all we really need is those 15% of people who aren't participating to come out and vote like they did last time. So we always have rejected the polls as being a true indicator of the, let's say, true feeling of the American people. So while the polls are there, we're going to be out there knocking on 1 million doors like we did during the DNC. We're knocking on 1 million doors during the RNC, and we've got 2 million staff, or 2 million volunteers, 2,000 field staffers. I mean, this is a dry run. As you've said, this is key. This entire convention is going to set the standard for if we can actually turn out and get those educated suburbanites, those homeowners, those mothers, those fathers, immigrants, as we saw with the naturalization ceremony, that it spoke to them. Like, we're trying to reach out to all of these groups, especially law enforcement. We love law enforcement. Communities of color or underprivileged communities are our most vulnerable without those types of American heroes. And when you see people, getting hit in the head with bricks and executed in the streets while this convention is going on, the Democrats are, it sounds kind of sick, but there's playing into our narrative, but we don't want them to. We don't want this chaos. And as we keep saying, the chaos is increasing and the lawlessness is increasing. All they seem to do is prove us right. And we don't want to be right. But my gosh, any decent family man or family woman or of any gender would be horrified to see that happen in their street. And the American people are waking up to this, and the campaign being live, not being a scripted eulogy like it was for Uncle Joey. It was very nice. I have to admit they did a good bit of town propaganda for him, but this is a live show. We've got his family out there. We've got Melania, the First Lady, who fashion magazines and American media has shunned. Her only crime is supporting the best and positive messages to American youth, wonderfully redoing the Rose Garden only to be lambasted by people who don't understand how seasons work. And we're saying there's no color in the garden. These sort of like left-wing extremism that proves our point day by day. And when we're going to have people like Marsha Blackburn speaking tonight, we're going to have Mike Pence, who's from Indiana, Lincoln's state. That's the home of the Republican Party. We're the party that freed slaves. We're the party that now is working for that Second Chance Act. We had that gentleman with the who was a bank robber who now has got a full pardon. President Trump
Right.
did that
Okay.
symbolically.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt
So
you there, Errol, but I'm going to sort of leap in. And I was very interested in the point you were making earlier about the polls, because, of course, that's the only scientific evidence we have of the mood in America. But just picking apart those polls, and my apologies for doing that, I mean, Donald Trump is liked by about 42% of the American population. The rest of the country not only dislikes him, I mean, they dislike him a lot because they just don't think he's presidential. They don't like his tweets. They don't like his finger in everyone's eye. And there is a sense that he doesn't have much to show for his cantankerous behavior. I mean, given all that, do you think that he would win the election if it's held today?
Well, absolutely, and that is thanks to the wonderful foresight of our founding fathers. We live in a democratic republic. We don't live in a country where the majority of the mob rule dictates situations. You know, we don't have a popular vote. We have an electoral college. So each state has a voice. This is a union of states that have governors in their own internal systems and own beliefs and faiths and everything. So Donald Trump is the president for the entire country. He's not the president for, say, the majority of, like, 30 million people live in California. I think like 70 million people voted in the end in the total presidential election because Americans don't even get out and vote. Our voters do. The Democrats don't seem to. But if you went to a vote. I mean, this isn't me. This is Plato. You know, that the democracy will lead to tyranny if you do not have checks and balances. And the electoral college is what has made this the most functional, prosperous, and you know, fiat lux to the world in the sense of having a democracy that can have peaceful transfers of power. And that peaceful transfer of power is because Donald Trump's going to win the electoral college. I'm not going to come up here and lie to you and say he's going to win the popular vote, because that's quite simply not how you get elected in a modern democracy. This sort of idealistic vision where we're all putting a pebble in a bucket and standing in line to vote for the next, you know, guy in Athens. That's not how this works. This is a diverse nation, a multicultural nation full of immigrants from every continent with you know, a long history both domestically and with change in diasporas. So states have the right, and the individual state right is going to be what's going to give to Donald Trump this victory. Because yes, he's not going to win the popular vote, but we're not out here to convince the masses. We're out here to convince the free thinkers, the people who want to, you know, be best and make America great again, and keep the legacy of what this country was, not forget our history, not erase it, but my gosh, not making the mistake of erasing it so we repeat it. And so I think that Donald Trump is going to win in a landslide in the electoral college. He doesn't need to have the mass support of people who perhaps are unaware of the system. He needs to have the mass support of people in all different states with all different regions, which is much more complicated than being TikTok famous, which is really all the Democrat Party can put out there with AOC or Bernie Sanders or anything. Actually, Bernie Sanders would have been a much better candidate. He could have won a populist vote, but that's another discussion.
Well, yes, it certainly is another discussion because, of course, that's, you know, there'll be different views on, you know, on him. But in spite of all you've said, and you've made your point very well and very articulately, in spite of all of that, I mean, you have to admit, though, that looking at those polls that you don't like and picking them apart, the president still has a mountain to climb, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. And Donald Trump, you know, he likes that underdog story. He punches from the ground up so well. Perhaps the polls don't, to us, represent him as having a mountain to climb. We want our voters to definitely see that as the situation and see that we are perhaps going to lose this election if we don't all get out and vote. So he has a mountain to climb because he's had, you know, the entire establishment against him from day one. A Harvard study came out in the first year of his presidency, 90% unfavorable coverage. The guy, you know, can't go and go hit a golf ball without people declaring him Hitler or something. So he has a mountain to climb, but that's what Donald Trump does. Some people read history, some people write it. Donald Trump makes it, and that's why I think he's going to just, you know, completely outdistance Joe Biden, who I don't even know if he realizes he's climbing a mountain or is on the mountain.
Okay, we'll have to watch and see what happens. Erol Morkoc, I want to thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Erol is a political strategist and media spokesman for the Republicans.